Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the Nestrans meeting on the 21st of June. First item is 1.1, Declaration of Interest and Transparency Statements. Do we have any? Councillor Yu.
Probably relates to almost every item on the agenda, but my transparency statement in relation to my membership of Cycling UK. Having considered the objective test, I don't believe it's necessary to withdraw for any of the items. And just for completeness, my membership of the AA, which lobbies on behalf of motorists. And again, once again, having considered the objective test, I don't intend to withdraw.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't see any others. So we move on to 1.2, minutes of the board meetings of the 12th of April 23. Do we all agree these? See, that's all agreed. We then move on to item 2, a presentation by the North East Cycle Hub Scheme. We have Mark Morgan from Stella's Voice, Lorna McNeil and Emma Selway Grant from Gordon Rural Action, the Bikery at Huntley, and Scott Francis and David Evans from Angus Cycle Hub. I believe, is it David Evans?
David, I think.
Is it David taking this?
Thank you very much for having us here today. So purpose of our visit here today is, well, one to actually thank obviously Nestrans for the support for helping us get this scheme off the ground. My name is Scott Francis. I'm a project director at Angus Cycle Hub CIC, and we run a number of schemes in Dundee and Angus. We run a cycle hub in Arbroath and the new Dundee Cycle Hub in Dundee beside the V&A Museum, and we run that in conjunction with Angus Council and Dundee City Council. So one of the things that we're trying to do here today is look at bike reuse and trying to kickstart bike reuse within the North East, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. So we've crunched some figures. They're up on the screen there. So we're estimating that around about 12,000 bikes a year. That's equivalent to about 151 tons of waste. Currently are no use to anyone, sitting in people's sheds or getting dumped at reuse centres, household waste recycling centres within Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. And these could have been used to help active travel, help some of the remits within the Scottish Government and targets that we're all looking for in terms of carbon reduction and clean air and things like that. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of, thanks, mate. So in terms of kind of what we're trying to achieve, we're trying to provide free access to bikes. We're trying to provide free and low-cost access to bikes in the Northeast. So why are we doing this? Well, it's a catalyst thing in encouraging active travel, contributing to the Scottish Government targets, as I said, reducing car dependency for shorter local journeys, reducing transport poverty barriers, improving the air quality at local level, encouraging adoption of healthier lifestyles, diverting waste from a landfill into a circular economy model, and also reducing carbon emissions. So in terms of kind of what we're doing at the moment, so collectively we've come together as a network. So it's the Stella's Voice, the Bikery, Gordon Rural Action, and ourselves to help deliver and like to drive forward a scheme for the Northeast to take some of these objectives forward. At the moment, so we've got 3 partners on board. We've got a couple in the pipeline as well, looking to come in. And collectively, what we've realised is that it's a big problem, and we can't all do it individually, but as a collective, we can hopefully make some motion to actually do some good. So one of the objectives is obviously to develop the network further, develop a referral scheme where the local authority and external partners can nominate someone to receive a bike. So that's either free of charge or through low cost through shops such as the Bikery. And this comes off the back of the objectives of the Scottish Government's free access to bike scheme that we've been involved in Dundee and Angus. So Angus Cycle Hub were one of 9 delivery partners within that, and we successfully delivered 1,400 bikes to young people who could not afford a bike as part of that scheme. So this is kind of an extension to the pilot project that we've been doing. And obviously, we're but again, the big thanks to John and all the rest of the guys, the team at Nestrans for making the funding happen to drive this forward in the Northeast. So one of the other things that we're trying to do is obviously bikes take up an awful lot of space. Our current warehouse in Arbroath, we're sitting on around about 500 bikes at any one time. We're in the peak season at the moment, so we can be getting in excess of 120 bikes a week at the moment during the middle of peak season. You need somewhere to process this. So one of the things that's lacking at the moment is a distribution center and somewhere to do that. So that's why we're working with Stella's Voice and Mark. Mark will take you through kind of some of the stuff in a minute in terms of what he's hoping to do. And then we need to put in place things like service level agreements with the councils and the folk there who are dealing with waste within the independent regions to be able to use some of that waste and we'll know that it's going to a good cause. So we're lucky we've just signed a service level agreement with Aberdeenshire Council for uplift of bike waste from a number of the household waste recycling centres within Aberdeenshire, and we're hopefully going to do the same within Aberdeen as well coming up. So. And then obviously we've got to build all the support services around about that as well, and develop the tools and methodologies that we've been using in Angus since 2015 to hopefully support that network of people to start doing good. Cheers.
Make sure that you let go know the next slide.
Sorry. Go
ahead just now.
All right. Okay. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were one ahead. Okay. Can you go back one slide, please? That's all right. Thank you so much. So how do we know this works? So as I said, we've been operating since 2015, and during that time, we have a service level agreement with Angus Council to basically pick up all the bike waste from the recycling centres. So we've collected over 13,000 bikes. That's 164 tonnes of waste. We've recorded over 500,000 kilometres of cycling activity through incentivising active travel as a means to that. We've had over 25,000 participants through our events, workshops and hubs. And then we're just touching over 1,000 tonnes of CO2 savings as well in terms of that. We've distributed over 4,000 bikes back into the community. Next slide, please. So next steps for us. I'm going to pass on to our partners in the moment who to take you through kind of what they're doing individually. But our next steps for our organisation is to continue to support the delivery of this. So we're going to further develop the cyclehub.org brand and name, recruit more partners into the scheme, look at options for future sustainability and funding, which, as you'll know, is interesting in the current landscape in terms of the budget. Develop the partner resources and develop the systems and reporting methodology that we need to do that. So we're really excited about some of the stuff that's going on within our sector at the moment. So working with Circuit Community Scotland on standardising, hopefully to standardise the way the reporting happens, so we can actually have a better understanding in terms of cycle use, bike reuse across the whole of Scotland. So we're working on that as well in the background. And then we'll further support the development of the regional distribution centre, which will hopefully be at Peterhead at Stella's Voice. And then we're, again, exploring options for cost savings. So as I said, collectively, we work together. So we're looking at things like bulk purchasing to be able to recycle light things. We're always looking for bits and pieces, whether it's cables for bikes, tyres, grips, things like that. It's much easier as a collective to come together and demand prices from manufacturers and be able to look at the kind of the cost saving measures to make it more economical and more sustainable in the long term. Next slide, please. That's my bit. I'm just going to pass you on to Mark from Stella's Voice, and he's going to talk a little bit more about actually what does the journey look like. So in terms of, where do these bikes go at the end of the day? So Mark, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. My name is Mark. I'm from Stella's Voice. I've been with Stella's Voice for 35 years. I've been leading the organisation since 2014. Primarily, we operate overseas, helping to stop young kids being trafficked. And then we work in the Northeast, primarily poverty reduction. And we run a ton of reuse and recycling projects to help make that happen. And that's how this kind of conversation started with Nestrans and the partners here. And if I can get the next slide, please. Thanks. For us, it's about bikes, but the bike is actually not the end of the process here. It's the start of the process. Because what we find is the bike opens the door to so many other things, and I'll go on to explain the next slide. One of the things that we're looking to deal with is the availability of bikes, and that's part of what the project is about. When somebody doesn't have the means of being able to go out and buy a bike, we make one available for them. We don't think they should be, excluded from that option just because they don't have the means. But then it's about engaging with that individual, because quite often when somebody is in the scenario where they don't have the means to get a bike, there's often other challenges that they're facing. So again, we look where we can provide that kind of wraparound support with that. Training is a big part of the ethos of what we're doing. I'll come back to the training part in a minute. And the support, which again is that what else is needed, what else is going on in your world, what else can we help and wrap around that kind of just wider support. That's part of what it's all about. And quite often that conversation wouldn't take place, but the bike becomes the mean to open the door to start that conversation and just get in there and help and be what we say in our bands, a source of help and hope. And that's part of what the ethos of this is about. And it's then giving people that experience. I've been cycling since a kid, and I still can't find anything or very little on a day-to-day basis that rivals the experience of just being out on the bike, just going for it. That freedom, that freewheeling down the hill, and on the rare days when it's dry, but even in the rain, it's just something magical about it, and you feel better about yourself. And we want to just replicate that experience for so many, especially for those that just haven't had that option to date. The last year and a half, there's been a slight twist for us. Next slide, please. Many of you will know Moldova. It's been in the news because it borders Ukraine, which is where our work is. And I sit here today, our operations director is actually in Ukraine. He spent 3.5 hours at the border this morning and has gone into Ukraine. But there's also Ukrainians in the northeast. The three that you see there in that on these pictures, they are Ukrainian mums that I met 2 weeks ago at the Aberdeen Dice Hotel. They came along to pick up the bikes for their children because they were at school, they couldn't make it. And that's just one of a number of times we've done this with them. But it's not just about providing bikes to Ukrainian refugees. If you look at the next picture that's about to come up, the two gentlemen that you'll see, one on the right is called James. On the next slide, please. Thanks. And the gentleman on the left, his name is Orest. He's also a Ukrainian refugee. He's employed by us. He works for us. He's our bike mechanic. And he's involved in getting the bikes ready. But also shortly, we're working with the Ukrainian community in Aberdeen, where we're about to do a training workshop where the kids will come, probably just at the start of the school holidays, and we're going to run a training workshop where they will learn how to, pump up your tire and how to adjust the seat and all that sort of. What was when I was a kid was normal, common knowledge seems to have been gone. So again, we're involved in that whole kind of process. And that's where the partnership comes in. It's working together with, wherever people are coming from. It's working together with the partners that we're here today with, providing that learning experience and passing on that knowledge, and then getting them to in turn, older brothers and sisters, pass that knowledge on to their younger brothers and sisters as they grow up. And purpose and passion basically encompasses everything that we do, everything we're about. And this project is about helping people in some way, shape or form. Sometimes it's the physical things, the practical things, providing the bike. But then when you provide the bike, sometimes, just getting out on the bike for half an hour, you can blow off steam. It's a release. So then there's the kind of mental well-being aspects of what goes on in so many other areas. And then there's the whole training and learning and engagement. And, some of our get-to goals would be that we would see that picture, by the way, was actually taken. It's not been photoshopped in any way. It was taken in Peterhead 2 days ago. And that's why I took the picture, because, it's a rare thing. And as I went down to take the picture this is the back of where our buildings are. We have a market garden and a development, and we put in cycle paths a couple of years ago. And you won't see it in the picture's too small, but there's a family that literally just happened to cycle by, mum, dad, and 3 kids, all on bikes, went past. And I was like, oh, great, grabbed it. And that's what we're looking to do. That's what we want to see. Greater engagement, greater use of the facilities, people getting out and about, people getting active, people get healthy, getting exercise, so on and so forth. And that is really what we're hoping to do, and scale this up on such a scale that we don't want to see any bike going in the bin. We want to see everyone that is, sometimes you'll get a bike that's beyond repair. Let's salvage it, use the parts, use that to help somebody else. Give the bikes, donate the bikes, sell some of the bikes, which makes what we do sustainable. But just generally, just begin to slowly change attitudes, behaviors, habits. And that's the passion of what this is about, helping the planet, but more importantly, helping people as we do it. Thank you. My apologies. We have a video. I forgot. I thought it wasn't working. It's literally about 90 seconds, and it's the Ukrainians getting some of the bikes. Sorry. It's just music, but obviously it's not working, but it's more the imagery. There was music just to watch, but it's just to see the kids get in the bikes. And every one of these, I'll just say while the video is playing, and this to me is probably the most poignant thing of everything that we do. Every bike is not just a number on a sheet and an item diverted from landfill. That bike becomes a story because it's connected to a person. And every one of those youngsters that you see there, I've seen some pretty horrific stuff, having fled what they fled in Ukraine, for example. But it's not just about Ukrainian refugees, it's people here in the Northeast too. And every bike is a story and a person.
Can I get the next slide, please? So my name's Emma. I'm from Gordon Rural Action, and this is my colleague Laura. We run 3 key projects. The Huntley Advice and Support Hub, which encompasses various different recycling projects such as a baby bank, uniform exchange, sports kits, and the Advice Hub itself, which is key to what we're doing with the Cycle Hub as it's a referral partner. We also have a charity shop, the Bargain Box, and our newest project obviously is the Bikery, which is our way of recycling and maintaining and repairing bikes and pushing them back into use into the community. Next slide, please. So we're just going to tell you a little bit about where we came from with bikes and how we've got the Bikery up and running and how it works with what we're doing and the project as a whole. So originally the Bikery was ran in Huntley as was called the Bike Shack. It's been open about 6 years. It was a very small project being run by a mental health charity, and it was in the industrial estate. The charity that were running it decided it didn't fit their remit anymore and they were going to close it down. We were at Gordon Rural Action at that time was given the opportunity to lease a building adjacent to where we are at the moment. It was an old bakers, and they'd gone into administration in 2018. It was a really big unit. It was going to disrepair, and we felt something could be done with the space. And the feedback from the community was they really didn't want to lose the Bike Shack, that it was vital to our community. It was vital to getting bikes out and to getting children on their bikes. So we felt that the best way to continue this project was to secure the lease and to transfer the Bike Shack to Gordon Rural Action, which is what we did.
Next slide. We took possession of the building in April 2022. We inherited 2 volunteers and a member of staff, plus a pile of second-hand bikes and some parts and old tools. It was a huge space. If you can imagine, not just a shop, but it also had a big space for manufacturing in the as a bakery in the past. So it gave us so much scope to use, but it was very dark, and the shop had a 1960s retro sort of bakery in it. So that all had to be stripped back and refitted. Next slide. So we started stripping back to the stonework. We removed wall partitions. We completely rewired. We insulated and put up ply walls, new flooring, new energy efficient heating, and a new logo and signage. Prior to securing the Nestrans funding, we did what we would call a DIY SOS. With the community saying, help, we want to do this, we need to get as much money as we can. And we were very fortunate that some companies came forward and donated all the plywood for all the walls. So they gave us about 80 to 100 sheets of marine ply. If you can imagine how expensive that was. We think we ended up with about £30,000 worth of materials donated, which meant that we could really take the project where it needed to be, so that we had a fantastic looking shop. The shop was actually built by our lead mechanic, who has building experience in his past working life. So that meant that we were able to keep our costs down as well. So we tried to be as frugal as possible as a charity. Next slide, please. So we have regenerated a shop for the town centre of Huntley, not just opened a bike shop. So if you can see the picture on, back a slide, please. If you see the picture on the left, that was the original J. Naismith Bakers. And on the right-hand side, what we've been able to turn it into now, which is obviously play on the words of the bakery is now the bikery. Next slide.
So we opened the doors of the bikery for a soft opening on the 21st of March. We were offering sales, servicing, repairs and parts, new and recycled, to help people get out on their bikes. As you can see from the pictures, this is how the shop looks on the inside now. So it's very different to how the bakers looked, much more modern. Next slide, please. Along with the shop, thanks to the Nestrans funding, we were able to work towards getting these bikes back out to the community as part of the project by creating a fully fitted out workshop. So we have 8 work bays with complete sets of tools and bike stands. We have a double bay, which is for community use and is already being used by our local school, local groups such as the Scouts, the Beavers and the Cobs. Our secondary school brings down pupils once a week to learn how to use their hands and how to use their bikes so that they're getting more practical experience. We created our team of volunteers, which we call the Bikery Folk, because obviously so Laura and I aren't, they're Doric speakers in Huntland, so we like to be, the Bikery Folk was very, very popular. And we've just put a funding application in for a community support mechanic, which should be able to help us to expand our ability to engage with our community more, because we have found the community just really want to be part of the space we've created. They really want to get on board with this. They want to get their bikes and they want to be involved in learning how to maintain them. The last piece of equipment we need to buy is our electric bike hoist. We have a lot of volunteers. Some of them are with us because of back problems and things like that. So lifting up an electric bike is not a great idea for them. So we're hoping this will support them going forward.
So what have we achieved to date? We've had 166 bikes donated. Oh, next slide, sorry. Oh, back one again, sorry, do apologise. 166 bikes have been donated to date. We have managed to put 190 bikes back into the community up to the end of May. So far in June, we've sold another 23. We've got 3 members of staff, 2 full-time, 1 part-time. One of those was a youth member of team that came to us as a trainee, and we've now been able to, after a year's training, put them into a full-time position as a bike mechanic, which is phenomenal because that opportunity wouldn't have been open anywhere else. We have 11 volunteers. And we've put 3 additional mechanics through Bronze Valetech training. Again, there's a real lack of mechanics in this field at the moment, and to be able to get more people trained up in this is fantastic. We've got community groups using the workshop. We've had the Beavers have been in and had a go at bike maintenance. We had a whole host of things we were going to take them through, but all they wanted to do was pump up tyres. So that's what they did. We had the school that come and use our workshop for young people disengaged with education. So they come along with PSAs and they learn new skills. And these are the types of people that we then want to be able to offer the next sort of bike apprenticeship to this coming year. So we'll be offering that position from September onwards, with thanks to Nestrans funding. We've also just won the contract to maintain electric bikes for the Huntley Travel Hub. So we're working closely in partnership with the Huntley Travel Hub to make sure that we're delivering a holistic service right the way throughout Huntley, and that we're working together and not sort of out of partnership, which is really important. And just wanted to share with you the postcode impact of the people that have sort of been coming and using our service already. The majority of people are obviously from Huntley, but we've had people come from Fraserburgh, Macduff, Banff, Inverurie, Inch, Heath and Buckie. And that's just from the postcodes that we collect when people come and buy a bike from us. So it just shows you that even though we are in Huntley, we are actually still known Aberdeenshire wide, and we can have a supportive impact right across the piece, which is fantastic.
Next slide, please. So the next steps for the bikery, we'll be doing our official launch on the 25th of August 2023. We are hoping to purchase the building that we have the bikery housed in. As I said, we currently lease it. We've already secured 50% of the funding for this, and we have 2 funding bids submitted. So we anticipate that should be by the end of the year. As I said, we're going to recruit a community support mechanic. We have to get more mechanics and more people through their Velotech training. We have 2 going on their silver training next weekend, actually. We are in the process of securing SQA accreditation so that we can offer courses in bike maintenance. We're at the final stages of that. We hope then to be able to support more trainees and more volunteers and bring more people in, and obviously increase our engagement with the community throughout Aberdeenshire and in conjunction with our partners, and also increase bike donations and be able to work with the partners to get the bikes that we need through the network, so that if there's somebody looking for a bike we don't have, we can contact Mark or Scott and say, I need this bike, and they'll be able to get that to us, which is amazing. And get more bikes back into our communities and more people cycling.
Thanks very much, Emma. So just going on, obviously, the bikery have obviously just said is in terms of actually the fantastic stuff that they've managed to achieve individually as an organisation. Collectively, we've managed to deliver over 250 bike packages in the last round of funding, and that's including helmets, lights, and locks. Thank you. We've provided 2 Velotech courses. So Velotech's one of the industry standard awards for accreditation for lots of bike mechanics. So we need to be putting more of these. The figures that we're talking about here are 12,000 bikes a year. That's enough 15 full-time mechanics working full-time within the Northeast, Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. But there's no funding for that at the moment. So we need to make inroads into towards that. We're developing, as I said previously, a new kind of a reporting and processing app. The idea from this is data is key for a lot of this stuff within our sector. We need to be able to understand sizes of bikes, because we know through delivery of the free access to bike schemes for Transport Scotland that there's certain sizes are like hen's teeth. So, and it tends to be from in those teenage sizes, 17-inch frames, kind of 15 inches. So we need to be able to understand who has what, where in the country. So we're going to trial that within the Northeast. We're going to have the processing and stuff to put in place to be able to understand that. From the learning that we're taking from this, we need to understand in terms of margin control of the things for the bikes and stuff as well. So we need to be able to understand how much labor is going into a bike, how much parts are going into a bike to make it actually profitable at the end of the day. It's pointless putting £50 worth of labor into a bike that's bought from Halfords for 75 quid. It's okay and then if you're applying more parts into it. So we need to be able to understand that. We need to be able to control that. So that's again some of the understanding that's going on. Logistics, we're very lucky that Mark effectively has the logistics hub in place with the work that they're doing with Stella's Voice. So we're using that knowledge that Mark has and their space at Peterhead to help deliver kind of these outcomes for the Northeast. They're able to go out, someone's able to call up Stella's Voice, say, I've got a bike ready for collection. They'll go out and they'll pick it up as part of their standard, and then it goes back to the Northeast where it's checked, and then we can then distribute it to the other partners. And it's trying to build that holistic, bigger picture. That's what we're trying to do here. So we've obviously had to set up a new brand, events, marketing assets, everything else going forward. We've just signed a service level agreement with Aberdeenshire Council for uplift of bike waste from Peterhead, Macduff, Huntly, Ellen, Stonehaven and Bankery recycling centres. We've delivered 43 bikes to Ukrainian refugees, thanks to Mark. We held a bike recycling event at Robert Gordon University. And then we've also had bikes donated to charities such as Aberdeen for a Middlefield Community Project. And some of these, the people were actually hoping to come on board as partners for the project. So that's where we're at the moment. I think if I leave it here in terms of, I just want to thank for the level of support that we've had in terms of financial support from Nestrans to date. We understand that, and I think everyone's feeling the pinch at the moment in terms of what that looks like. One of the things that we always struggle with within our sector, and it's not just our sector, is that there's plenty of capital funding out there. We can buy as many bikes as we want, but if we don't have the mechanics and the revenue funding to be able to actually deliver a lot of this stuff, we're scuppered. So we need to be able to look at kind of in terms of like that balance between revenue and capital funding, and then it's our job to look at the future sustainability of that to actually make this profitable and actually make it self-sustaining at the end of the day. We've got work cut out, but we've got we're in this for the long run. So I think that's why it's important for us is gather your support here today. And especially in terms of a lot of the stuff that we do, it covers such a multitude of assets, whether health and well-being. So you're looking at health outcomes, you're looking at recycling outcomes, you're looking at the travel outcomes. If any of the colleagues are here today, we'd love to speak to you to see what we can do in terms of to support some of the programs, to support the work, some of the work that you're doing within public health and further afield. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for our partners today. I thank you very much to John, who's facilitated a heck of a lot of this stuff as well. So thank you very much, John. Thank you. We'd love to be able to, next slide, please. So, and we're welcome to take any questions.
Okay, I've got one question. On the bikes you take, is it any level of how bad or how good they are, or are you selective?
We will take everything and anything. One of the things we found is that if you don't accept someone's the goodwill, is like then you're less likely to get it again. We have the processes and methodology in place that we get stuff that's been dragged out from rivers that's completely unusable. That will then just go back into the recycling stream for scrap metal mixed and then recycled in that way. So we've got the agreements in place to be able to recycle that waste.
We've also just started that if someone comes and donates a bike, or if we go specifically out to an event, so we're going to Kemney on the 30th of June to go and do a bike collection. They're doing a bike drive for us, and we've got vouchers that we can give out. So if they donate a bike, we give them a voucher, and they get £10 off a bike if they then come back to Huntly and buy one of our recycled bikes in the future. So we're trying to incentivize people to want to come back to our shop as well, to then keep that process in circulation, encourage people to keep coming back.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Blake.
Thank you, convener. I had a couple of questions. That was a really interesting presentation. First of all, I was keen to understand, so in the city, are you looking also at a distribution centre, or is it or is it just in Peterhead, or are you looking at for a distribution centre here? And I guess as well as that, so in my family, we have a number of bikes in the garage, and we recently donated one of the smaller ones that was kind of turning to a bit of a rusty old thing. But we took it to Hazelhead, to the recycling centre. Now, because we weren't entirely sure where else it should go. So I guess it would be good to understand in the city what that route to donation would be.
The minute we're managing that from Peterhead, the get-to goal is to have a hub in the city itself. Part of what we're doing, we have yellow and red tags. So we tag when a bike comes from the Shire or where it comes from the city. As an organisation, we are in the city and Shire all day, every day. So we're building that into our already logistics, so to speak. So we're not making extra journeys for it, because again, that's part of our ethos, is to try to minimise that. But we're currently running it from Peterhead, but the get-to goal is, there'll be a direct point of contact, a physical presence in the city.
Thank you. That's helpful to know. The other thing I was going to ask about, so I'm a bikeability instructor, and I've just been doing bikeability with some P6s, and about a third of the kids are not participating now. At this particular school, that is not because of availability of bikes, I would say. But I was wondering, generally across the city, people may not participate for that reason. And I was wondering how this scheme would link into the identifying the children who are not participating in bikeability. In the city, of course, we teach bikeability level 2, but who are not participating in level 1 or level 2, and ensure that they do have access to bikes. How do we go about that process?
Again, one of the things that we plan to develop is we want to establish direct connections with every school for that reason, because you're getting first-hand information of where the need is, and again, getting it directly to that help, to that point. Oh, echo there. So yeah, so that is very much part of the ethos. We've already spoken about it. It's kind of in the blueprint of where we want to go. And the idea is to get, tentacles into every aspect of the community at every level. We want it to become as synonymous as, when you need milk, you know where to go to get milk. When you need a paracetamol, you know where to go and look for a paracetamol. And when it comes to a bike, the get to goal is Cycle Hub, where the partners are, how to engage, how to request, how to refer. That's our get to go.
So just as an impact perspective, we were incredibly busy when we had the P67 bikeability come about, and all the parents wanted us to also check over their children's bikes before they went to bikeability, so they didn't fail the checks, because they didn't want to be embarrassed that they hadn't touched their children's bikes for so long. So there was that aspect. We also then had, we were contacted by parents who help with bikeability, saying we've got a number of children who don't have their own bikes. So we had a young girl who happened to be a Ukrainian refugee as well, that came to us, and we were able to give them a free bike, helmet, lock and lights, so that we could set them on the way to join in with bikeability. So we are already having the starting impact. We are working with June from Bikeability, who works very closely with John anyway, and she's already engaged with working with us to enable us to contact us and say, I've got 6 kids here who haven't got bikes. What can you do for me? So we're hopefully already making inroads in that way.
I'll just come in a little bit. So obviously, in terms of the pilot scheme that was running with Transport Scotland for free access to bikes, which is now getting delivered by Cycling Scotland, is one of the intrinsic things that was within that was the referral model. So we've got a network of 32 partners that can refer into that. So it's our partners around the ground are the best the people to know who's best placed to actually receive a bike, rather than someone else deciding that. We run the bikeability within Angus, and we have done since I think 2015. So we operate in 43 schools. So it was very easy for us to be able to actually just link that straight into the referral process. So active schools, head teachers can directly refer into the network as they can, and then they'll get at some point a bike or an entire bike package delivered back to them.
I just wanted to comment that actually I think one of the good things, I think that all sounds great, would be some bike maintenance for the people who are bikeability instructors. So it's very obvious so certainly at the school I've been delivering at, there are 3 parents involved in delivering it. And one is a very enthusiastic person who failed lots of bikes. And then the two of us don't know quite so much, and so are much more like, oh yeah, that's fine type of thing. So yeah, so I think there could be an upskilling of the bikeability instructors.
100% agree. Is that one of the things we've been successfully doing within Angus is prior to the actually delivery of bikeability in the schools is that we send in mechanics to check. So the kids go in, they bring their bikes in on a certain day, and they're checked. However, you might know bikeability has just had a third of its funding cut. So that's been wiped off the face of the planet. So that no longer exists. The benefit for what you're saying is doing the pre-inspection checks is because what you tend to find is if you're dropping in a volunteer coordinator in to deliver bikeability, they turn them in, they've suddenly got 20 kids and 5 of those bikes. They spend the entire session fixing those bikes, and no actually bikeability is getting delivered. So we need to, this is again another one of these things that we need to look at, kind of like how we support that. And we're seeing that, some of the stuff that we can do for this is if we get this mechanism right, that actually where people are paying for like low cost bikes, actually some of that money can then go to support some of that delivery.
Okay, can we bring in Kelly Wiltshire, please?
Thank you, Chair. It was just to let you know, Councillor Blake, that in terms of the city, Nestrans did fund last year Adventure Aberdeen to have a fleet of bikes that could be used for bikeability. So if they go into a school and there are kids that don't have a bike, they should still be able to take part because they have a fleet of bikes that can be used for that purpose. And then hopefully this bike recycling scheme will allow the children who aren't able to have a bike to permanently have their own bikes, but there is a fleet of bikes within Adventure Aberdeen purely for that purpose, for bikeability, that was funded by Nestrans.
Okay, and Councillor Reid.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I'd like to extend my thanks to all three organisations. I think the work you're doing is fantastic. It's a really, really positive story. First of all, to help spread the word, could you share your slides with the board so we can actually share it with our fellow council colleagues? So that's first of all. Secondly, I was going to ask for the address of the bikery and donate a bike. We're a cycling family and my youngest has grown out of it. But now that I know you're doing an event in Kemney, can you tell me a little bit more about that? My ward is right next door to Kemney. I'd like to help publicise that as well. We're in the process of, we have quite a lot of rural transport problems in Kemney. We're building a cycle path from Kintore to Blackburn, and then we're designing one from Kintore to Kemney. Now, the academy is in Kemney, but the kids from Blackburn and Kintore go there, but they've got no independent means of actually getting there. So hopefully this solves that problem. So it's great you're going to Kemney. There might be a return visit, once we actually get the path built, etc. Because I think there would be a lot of kids actually interested in actually being able to connect with their friends in different towns. So the three towns are linked, but they're they're far apart. And poor buses, I mean, they can't actually get to see each other, without actually having parents with their cars. So there's that. A little bit more about that event, if you don't mind. Also, it's great to hear that you've got the contract for the e-bikes in Huntly. I don't know if I'm preempting anything, but there is going to be an e-bike hub eventually. It's been coming for about 2 years in Kintore. And I know there's been a soft launch of one in for Martin. I don't know if there's contracts there for the maintenance of those ones, but it might be worthwhile speaking to Aberdeenshire Council officers on that one. And if you could tell me a bit more about the Kemney event, I'd appreciate that.
Yes, Councillor Reid. What we'll do is we can get this slides sent from here.
The event is from 2 till 4 at the primary school. Oh, I don't know the name of it. I've got, so the lady that runs the bikeability is the lady that's running the bikeability there that's contacted me and said she's doing all the sort of promotion of it from her end, and we're sort of just coming along and doing the collection and supporting her. But I'll find out more details and get them to you. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Marvelous. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Ewell.
Thanks, Chair. It's not really a question, it's just to say thank you for a fascinating and I'm not sure if enthusing is quite the right word, but enthusing presentation. It really does show you what's possible and what you can do. So thank you very much.
Okay, I see no other questions. So I'd like to put my thanks to all the presenters today. It was very interesting. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 3.1, unaudited annual accounts 22-23, and that's Ella Stolt.
Thank you, Chair. The board is required to consider the unaudited financial accounts for the financial year 22-23. Local authorities and similar bodies are required to ensure that they demonstrate proper stewardship of their financial affairs. The accounts are prepared in accordance with the Code of Practice for Local Authority Accounting in the United Kingdom 22-23 and presented in a format that follows international financial reporting standards. Appendix 2 details a surplus for the financial year of 1.154 million. Nestrans is now able to hold a general fund, and in 22-23, historical capital grants were also drawn down from partners. A significant amount of the surplus has already been allocated to complete projects in 23-24. The board are asked to consider the management commentary and governance statement sections of the draft accounts, which includes a brief description of the financial performance of the partnership over the period. The request for final delayed drawdown are presented in Appendix 3. So 2 recommendations for the board. Consider the unaudited accounts for 22-23 and approve their issue to the external auditor and the controller of audit as per Appendix 1, and approve the final delay in drawdown for 22-23 as per Appendix 3. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Is there any questions at all? No. We'll move to the recommendation, as read out. Consider the unaudited annual accounts 22-23 and approve the final delay in withdrawdown for 22-23. Okay, thank you. We now move on to item 3.2, and that's Ella again. 23 to 24 budget matters.
Thanks, Chair. Right, so this Budget Matters report provides an update on the Nestrans budget monitoring for 23-24 and forecast outturn position. Appendix 1 sets out the summary monitoring to May 23 with a total expenditure budget of 6.688 million before today's final delayed drawdown and environment requests. Spent to date being 525,000. There are detailed environments for approval in Appendix 2. A grant funding application to Transport Scotland of 600k has been accepted for Regional Transport Partnership Active Travel. Now, the split between projects shown in the Budget Matter reports has been updated with Transport Scotland's approval to move 51,800 from cycle route signage to core paths to enable all 5 remaining areas within Aberdeenshire to be served in 23-24. So just to confirm, the revised funding for core paths is now 151,800 and cycle route signage being 198,200. Should the delayed drawdown in section 3.1 appendix 3 be approved along with the active travel grant, this will bring the overall Nestrans budget to over 7 million. Regarding the pension discretion policy, the date of implementation is still to be agreed. So partnership has sought a further extension and an update will be provided on the next board meeting in September. There are still 16 developments to be claimed from the Strategic Transport Fund balance of 496,000. There were no claims made so far in 23-24. So 5 recommendations. Note the monitoring position and forecast presented in Appendix 1. Approve the environments set out in Appendix 2. Note the update on pensions discretion policy. Note the additional funding awarded in 23-24 through the RTP Active Travel Grant. And note the Strategic Transport Fund position. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I see no questions, so we go to the recommendation accepted 1 to 5 as read out on page 72. Agreed. Thank you. We now move on to item 3.3, Treasury Management Strategy, and that is Ella again.
Thanks, Chair. So this report seeks approval from the board to agree the proposed Treasury Management Strategy Statement for the financial year 23-24. The Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy Code of Practice requires that the board sets out its Treasury Management Strategy for borrowing and investment each year. The responsibility lies with the Nestrans Board. However, there is a service level agreement with Aberdeenshire Council who assist in the day-to-day duties of the Treasury management activities. The strategy is set out in Appendix A and B. Appendix C shows a summary of the investment activities for 22-23. So interest rates will be dependent on strength of the UK economy and Bank of England's monetary bank rate. The legacy of COVID, the energy crisis, and the current war in Ukraine will all affect financial markets and influence UK growth and government inflation targets. Nestrans will continue to maintain only temporary short-term investments depending on the cash flow requirements. The criteria for the investment of fund is that the security of the investment is the most important consideration, with the return being of secondary importance. There's only one recommendation for the board: approve the revised Treasury Management Strategy as set out in Appendixes A and B. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. See no questions, so we go straight to the recommendation. Approve the revised Treasury Management Strategy as sent out in Appendix A to B. We've all agreed. Thank you. I'd thank Ellie for the 3 reports there. Thank you. We now move on to item 4.1, Director's Report, and that'd be Rab. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The Director's Report is, as you say, under item 4.1 and talks about a number of recent developments and particularly meetings that have been held in the period since the last board meeting. There's a couple that I might bring to members' attention, if I may. Paul Finch and myself, we went and had a visit to Fraserburgh Harbour and were talked through the proposals up there in terms of the potential expansion of the harbour. I've included a diagram just to give members a feel for the scale of the proposals that are being talked about, some potentially really exciting proposals in the Fraserburgh Harbour area. The Chair and I also visited Lerwick on the 7th of June for the meeting of the Regional Transport Partnerships. I think it was a very worthwhile meeting, and the partnerships are looking to bring forward a report which is currently titled Develop to Deliver. It would basically be, I guess, almost a manifesto of what the partnerships can do collectively and what we would hope to offer to COSLA, to Transport Scotland and the government in terms of working collaboratively and bringing forward things collectively that we feel we could do better than working individually. And finally, I was going to mention the Bus Alliance Board met on the 8th of June, and the minute of that meeting is attached as an appendix for members' information. So quite a lot happening on the bus side of things in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, and a really worthwhile partnership I think we have with the councils and the main bus operators. So it's there for members' information. Recommendation is to note the progress, but happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Rab. Question from Councillor Doima.
Hello, Rab, it's not a question, it's a clarification. The master plan is not proposed. It is in existence. The outline business case has now been completed and will be going forward to a full business case in the near future. Thank you. The extension is the proposal. Thank you.
Yep, thanks for that clarification. That's helpful. My understanding is, yeah, the extension is subject of bids to both governments in terms of thinking about a funding package going forward and then thinking about the implementation thereof. But that's really helpful. Thank you, Councillor.
Okay, I see no other questions, so we go to the recommendation. Note progress of liaison arrangements with other RTPs, Scottish Government and others, and arrangements for further meetings. Okay, we will now move on to item 4.2, Risk Register Review, and that is Jenny Anderson.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. This report is to enable the board to consider the outcomes of the latest review of the Nestrans Risk Register and provide any additional comment before approving its implementation to ensure that significant risks are identified, evaluated and controlled. The last review was carried out in June 2022, and the board has previously instructed that this be repeated on an annual basis. As noted, a number of normal business risks are mitigated due to Nestrans having service level agreements with our constituent councils for ICT, finance, legal and personnel for each, excuse me, and each authority already has risk management systems in place for these services. The scoring chart in Appendix 1 for level of impact and likelihood has again been adopted.
The cause and impact of risks thought relevant to Nestrans have been considered against how likely they are to happen and their impact to determine an inherent risk assessment score. Then any mitigating actions and the current progress against the risks are also presented and used to determine a residual risk assessment score. The previous risk register was taken as the start point and consideration given to any amendments required due to changes that have arisen in the past year or requirements for including any new risks that may have materialised. The revised risk register is presented for consideration in Appendix 2. It shows any amendments to the previous version and track changes to help identify what the proposed changes are. The scores have mostly stayed the same, with the exception of risk 8 now having, which is related, to the reduced funding being available for delivery of the regional transport strategy, which has increased its score due to the recognition of the challenge in economic climate and budget constraints that are affecting the public sector. This resulted in a reduction in capital funding allocation this year from Aberdeen City Council and the projection that it will remain at this level. And there's also an awareness that the Scottish Government may be reviewing revenue grants to regional transport partnerships in future as part of their resource spending review. So the board has been asked to consider the risk register and approve its implementation, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions or to incorporate any changes or additions to the register that the board might wish to make. Thank you.
Okay, I see no questions, so we'll move on to the recommendation. It is recommended that the board consider the attached risk register and approve its implementation. That's approved. I thank Jenny for that, and we will now move on to item 5.1, reducing car kilometres and carbon emissions options for the North East region. Here be Tim Steiner of Jacobs and Paul Finch. I think Tim is presenting.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. Board have previously been given sort of previews of some of this work. We discussed it at the North East Transport Consultative Forum, and I think we've provided summary of our intentions of this target previously in some of the strategic updates that we provide to the board. The relevance of this continues, what with the publication just yesterday, I believe, of the targets on greenhouse gas emissions in Scotland and the fact that they're just below the target going forward as well. And this being very much a key policy that Transport Scotland are taking forward in terms of their transport reaction to the climate change. There's a 20% target reduction in vehicle kilometres. And I think it's very important to obtain some factual evidence and background in order to inform how Nestrans respond to this target, both in our ongoing discussions with Transport Scotland and other partners going forward. And in that spirit, we consulted and contracted with Jacobs to provide us that advice. That advice has now been completed, and I'm pleased to say that Tim Steiner, Regional Director from Jacobs, is going to take us through the key findings of the report before we can have any questions on it. So thank you very much, and over to you, Tim.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Chair. If it's okay with you, I'll give you an overview of this technical work that Paul's introduced. I have some slides and some information. I think it'll take me about 15 minutes to run through those with you, if that's okay. And we'll give you a flavour of the overview and some of the context here. In terms of an opening remark, I've been a transport consultant working on behalf of public sector clients for 25 years on and off. I think this is the hardest issue that I have worked on. I don't mean from a technical calculations perspective. I mean for its implications of transport on communities, on society, and the interactions between transport and other elements of public policy. Hopefully over the next few minutes, we'll give you an overview of why that's the case. Go over to the next slide, please. There are a whole variety of targets in play here. They relate fundamentally to the targets for carbon emissions, but the key one that Paul had mentioned is what we refer to as the 20% traffic target. But let me just explain fully what that means. It is a Scottish Government target that the number of car kilometres I emphasise that, not the number of car journeys, but the number of kilometres travelled by cars in Scotland in 2030 will be 20% lower than it was in 2019. If I've said that in a logical way, then I've done well, because trying to communicate that in a linear way is sometimes quite challenging. Our work has tried to identify, to understand what does that mean for this region? How might the targets be achieved? And if they are achieved, what might be the implications for different parts of the region or different types of people? Because actually, as we'll come on to, the way those targets might be achieved, that target policies might be achieved, might have very different distributional impacts. Next slide, please. And this is the first of two slides that I've got with some of the context and the data, but I think it's important to provide you with this overview because it's the basis of any decisions following from this need to be taken. Were we to get the number of car kilometres in this region back to a level 20% less than they were in 2019, it's taking us back in car use to somewhere about the early 2000s. Car use has increased in this region and every other region of the UK fairly inexorably. That's the sort of scale of change for context. As we would entirely expect, the numbers of car kilometres travelled by different people varies widely, massively. Or could you just go back a slide, please? There are, on average, nearly twice as many car kilometres travelled per person by residents of Aberdeenshire than there are of Aberdeen City. It's exactly what we would expect, but within that, you know, there are some people within the city who drive a lot. There are some people within the Shire who do not travel by car. I'm just putting this out there to hope you know, give you a flavour of change. What's also very important, more affluent people are much more likely to travel by car than less affluent people. We know that it's what we would expect, but the most affluent typically travel about 3 times more kilometres by car than the least affluent on average. And very important to note in this context, and back to emphasising the number of kilometres by car, not the number of journeys, that most car journeys are relatively short. The graphic there is showing on the left-hand column the proportion of journeys made by car by distance, shorter ones at the bottom, longer ones at the top. The right-hand bar is showing the proportion of car kilometres made by those same journey distances. And just picking out one distance threshold, 20 kilometres is about in the middle of that graph. 20 kilometres, what's that, 12 miles? And I reckon that's here to Kintor or something like that. Journeys longer than that distance in the region are about a quarter of those that are made by car. So most journeys are shorter than that. But those longer journeys, longer than that, comprise about 2/3 of the car kilometres. Because there's not many of them, but they're long, so there's lots of kilometres associated with each one. Again, it's what we would expect, but hopefully it might be helpful to give you some of the context. Can I now have the next slide, please? A last bit of sort of background evidence, perhaps, for you. That the pie chart on the left there is the proportion of kilometres travelled by different modes of transport. So the big dark blue block is car, and the bits in the top right are other modes, active travel and public transport. And you can see that a bit more than 4/5 of all the kilometres travelled are by car. The relevance of that to this is that you could imagine, even if you made a very big increase to those active travel or public transport in the top right, and you could increase those by a big proportion of them, you might actually make only a relatively small dent in car use because car use is so dominant at the moment. On the right-hand side, that's looking at an estimate of the proportion of car kilometres by journey purpose. The darkest colour in the top left, the biggest segment, is leisure journeys. There are more kilometres made by journeys for leisure, days out, visiting friends, holidays, those sorts of things. There are more kilometres made by car for that purpose than any other. The top right quarter is commuting. A smaller proportion, still a large number. The purpose of that chart, though, in my mind, that makes me think that there is no one element that's not tackling one of those. Is not. We can't just tackle one of those purposes. It's not going to get us further. So that's some of the thoughts of the background evidence I'd like to leave you with. Could I have the next slide, please? I then just want to revisit the target in a little more detail, and then we'll go on to think through how the target might be achieved and how we can contribute towards it. The chart here on the right is showing two effects of the potential number of car kilometres in this region between 2019, which is there on the left-hand side of the chart, and 2030. Now, we had an effect, a big effect, didn't we, on car kilometres in 2020, thanks to the COVID pandemic. The effects of the COVID pandemic are still working through the system, in my opinion. We don't yet know from a transport perspective fully what impact that will have, because we are still adjusting our work patterns, travel patterns, leisure patterns as a result of that. My best estimate, though, if you look at car kilometres, obviously through the lockdown periods, car kilometres was very, very significantly reduced. But if we think about what that effect that might have in the long term, once all these bounce back issues have worked through, I think it will have a modest effect on the number of car kilometres. It might be at maximum a reduction of 10%, but it might be very little. I don't mind exploring that in more detail if you want, but a lot more to get through. But it is nowhere near the 20% level what the target is. It's the long-term effect, in my opinion. But I said before, traffic has grown fairly inexorably apart from COVID since we've been doing transport planning. And we would expect that to continue in the period to 2030. Not least the population of the region is expected to grow, the number of households in the region is expected to grow. There's other factors as well, but just from that perspective. And so we would expect that to increase. I think somewhere in the region of 10 to 15% is what we would expect that growth to be. Again, this is a forecast, it's an estimate, but that's my estimate. So what the right-hand side of this chart is showing is that once we factor in growth to 2030 and the COVID effects, where might traffic levels be in relation to those that we had in 2019? And the best situation is they might in 2030 be about the same as they were in 2019. And the worst case, from this carbon emissions perspective, is they might be about 15% greater. But don't forget the target is to be 20% less than we were in 2019. So the two green arrows on the right-hand side there are trying to show what level of reduction we need to achieve. And it isn't necessarily 20%. It's something in the range of between 19% and 30%. That is the action that needs to be taken in order for the target to be met, in my opinion, something in that range. Can I have the next slide, please? Because then we go on to think about, well, what could be done to influence the number of car kilometres that are travelled in the region? There is a whole suite of things, many of which yourselves and your partners are already working to deliver. Many of them are established within the RTS and other policy strategies plans. On the left-hand side there, a variety of things to encourage people to do other things apart from drive. The second block there's a whole variety of things could be done to improve the quality of alternatives to travel, in particular alternatives to car travel, particularly in relation to public transport and active travel. We've had a great presentation earlier on today about, one of the things around active travel. Then in the third block there, yourselves, partners already have some action underway that directly or indirectly discourage car use. The most one about them might be parking policies and parking charges. But then there's a fourth tier, the right-hand block there, of other things that are not in current practice, either because you've not chosen to adopt them or because actually you don't have the powers to adopt them. An example of that is road user charging. Our report and our work goes into each of these in some detail, and it forecasts the potential effects of those. It's not the purpose within this update this afternoon to try and give you that. I don't mind coming back to it if you have questions. But what's very clear from that analysis is there is no one of these measures that will get us close to the 20% target in terms of improving and encouraging use of alternatives. And it's very much back to that pie chart that had the big block of kilometres travelled by a car, that big proportion, and the small proportions by other modes, that it requires very big changes in those other modes to make a serious dent in car use. Let's have the next slide, please. You can imagine all those different options, and there's lots of uncertainties within all of those options, a myriad of combinations of things we could present to you. What we've done to try and give you a flavour and a feel for the potential effects is to group some of those. We've called them 5 scenarios, and we give here a quantitative forecast of their impacts on the numbers of car kilometres in the region. We've done that in 2 ways. Of the 2 columns of numbers there, the left-hand column that says long term is, well, if you did these things, what would they achieve once they're fully implemented? But particularly if we're talking about major improvements to public transport or active travel, these things will take many years. They will take decades to deliver comprehensively throughout the region. And so the right-hand column reflects on the fact that this target is in 6.5 years' time. So what might be achievable by 2030? I'd like you to focus actually first on scenario 2 there, as that's our business as usual. You know, if we carried on with the sorts of policy and delivery that has been enabled through the last few years, if that was to progress across to 2030, with improvements to public transport, promoting alternatives and the like, we think that whilst in the long term that might reduce car kilometres by about 7% on recent progress, that by 2030 it would actually have an impact on car kilometres of less than 1%. And a reminder here that the target is somewhere in the range of 19 to 30%. Our scenario 1 reflects on the fact clearly budgets are tight. We're aware of that. So can you carry on as business as usual? If not, you achieve less than the 1%. Scenario 3 there reflects on what if yourselves, Nestrans, and particularly the local authorities were to take some really stringent steps that are currently within your powers to constrain traffic levels, most particularly through much greater use of parking charges and controls. It is possible to imagine how that could be done, but this would be very significant changes within the city and the towns, particularly in Aberdeenshire. And that could make a significant impact on car kilometre levels. We estimate up to about 6%. So that's quite a lot, but again, well short of the target. But if looking at scenario 4, that's saying, well, what if you were to do those things and introduce those substantial measures to try and discourage car use, but also had access to lots more funds to improve alternatives to car use? Well, then you're getting up closer to the target, possibly 17%. But I still don't think, even with that scenario of lots more money and lots of local political will, you will achieve the target. So hence the implications of this is that some of those additional measures that are not currently in use, that might, well, it would not have to be, but in my opinion, the most perhaps pragmatic of those solutions might be road user charge is needed if the targets are to be met. And I will, if I could come on to what's the final slide for me, please, because our report goes into a lot of detail about some of the distributional impacts of these potential options. I wouldn't plan to say much about that. If we go back up one, that's it, thank you. But the way in which these measures are implemented would have significant distributional impacts. In the left-hand column there, improving alternatives to the car, if that's improving public transport and active travel, likely to have biggest impact on people who make short journeys, people who travel on the main transport corridors where public transport's likely to be, and of course only for people who are able to make use of those choices. Impact in middle column there, work, for example, and these are just examples, to discourage car use through parking controls is likely only to have a significant impact on journeys into town city centres. That's where you've got most opportunity to control parking. Road user charging, a distance-based road user charge, were it to be implemented, is likely to have more impact on rural areas where a higher proportion of the journeys are longer. And of course, any charging-based mechanism is likely to have a bigger impact on people who are on lower incomes. We have a lot of, as I say, of qualitative comment about that within our reporting. I'm very happy to take any questions about anything on the evidence base or on our recommendations there. But I think if you could flick on to one more slide, please. And Paul, do you want to speak to this? Because we concluded our thinking with a discussion we'd had Nestrans about, well, as a result of this, what might your offers be to national government in how it could help implement this, but also some of the requests and asks of those others.
Okay, thanks very much, Tim. We believe this is a valuable piece of research that's really got us thinking, and we're grateful for it. We want to continue the conversation. We think it's important that we continue the conversation with the Scottish Government and Transport Scotland, and we've tried to sort of frame around the offers and asks that we could continue this discussion with them, and we summarised them on the screen there. We want to continue to work to implement those measures that we already have in the toolbox. We realise that car kilometre target is one element of our of what we're trying to do. There are many other objectives and targets that we're working to as well, the health benefits, the welfare benefits, that are also very well achieving some of the contributions that we're wanting to do. We want to continue to define potential measures. We want to consider what locally led measures might look like, and those which are in our control, and what the distributional impacts of those would be. We want to offer to, within the ability of the resource constraints, provide regional local capacity to work alongside national partners to help develop measures that reduce car use, and support national partners communicate the extent of the climate emergency and the need for car kilometre and carbon emissions reductions in regional and local communications. We also have some asks of the national government as well. There needs to be robust and ongoing nationally led political support to communicate the challenge that's going forward. We want to ask for an enhanced national delivery plan to accompany the current route map, so that some of these challenges can be more clearly articulated, and the difficult choices, particularly those who have a large rural area. But there needs to be more complete local, regional, national monitoring of car kilometres and not car trips. We need more information on really what the national position is on options around road pricing schemes and demand measures as well. Clarity on whether additional funding will be available to regional and local partners to increase the attractiveness or capacity of alternatives. For support, developing appropriate modelling forecasts that help us apply this research to the scenarios that we see in front of us, and also to continue to support modelling tools that are better adapted to understand some of the distributional measures and some of the focus on some of the short trips as well. So we have a set of recommendations at the report end as well, to note the findings of the research as a valuable evidence base for future policy development. We want to we recommend publication of the consultant's report on the Nestrans website. Instruct the director to engage with Transport Scotland on the findings of the research, particularly in respect of the offers and asks, to disseminate research finding to local authorities to support their local transport strategies, local development plans and wider policy development, and also to maintain the policy approach as currently set out in the regional transport strategy at this time. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much, Tim, for your presentation.
Okay, thanks very much for that. We're now to go to some questions, and it's Councillor Marr.
Thank you. So you spoke about car kilometre and emissions. Are we talking petrol and diesel cars here, or are we allowing for the swap over to electric and hydrogen vehicles? Is my first question, I suppose. My second is a comment more that in an area with such limited public transport, which gets more limited as budget constraints bite in, it's not quite so easy as to do it in the central belt, where we have varied methods of public transport, which is regular and reliable. We have no option in some parts of Aberdeenshire but to take a car. And I think that policies could lead to worsening rural poverty. If you have to take your car into work and then you're charged more for parking and for your road use for that car, I just think that is not a feasible point going forward.
John, like to go back?
Thank you. Yes, I'll try and respond to those 2 points. Firstly, with a point about the target and whether it relates, or which kinds of cars it relates to. The target is simply the number of car kilometres. It is not a target for the number of petrol and diesel car kilometres or anything else. It arose from work undertaken by the Scottish Government, which looking at carbon emissions from transport, which showed that even with a shift towards greater uptake of electric cars, that wouldn't be enough for the targets to be achieved. And so a reduction in the number of car kilometres would also be required, but the target is simply on the number of car kilometres. So from this perspective, from the perspective of meeting that target, swapping a petrol or diesel car journey for an electric car journey doesn't count. Picking up on the second point, I absolutely agree, and I think it's part very clearly of what we're saying within our recommendations, and something about the distributional impacts there, that this, will have significantly different impacts on different types of people and different parts of the region, depending upon where they are. I think, and forgive me if I may, for playing devil's advocate slightly, because we have these sorts of discussions across the country. Yes, it's quite right that people in rural areas, forgive me for summarising and bracing, because we know there's lots of distribution within any community, but people in rural areas in general have access to fewer opportunities for public transport, and the longer journey distances means that and lack of infrastructure mean that active travel options are limited. So it is more challenging for many of them to implement change. The flip side, though, is, and some other authorities, some other people will be saying this, sorry, this is not, I'm just putting out there to demonstrate a point, that if we were representing purely urban representatives, we might be saying, well, it's the people in the rural areas who are making the longer journeys who need to make more of a change. I hope, sorry, forgive me, if hopefully that form of words is reasonable to illustrate a point. Because in general, the number of car kilometres travelled by rural dwellers is much greater than by urban dwellers. It's true in this region, it's true in all parts of Scotland and elsewhere. So from that perspective, perhaps a challenge can be put around it either way, but I absolutely recognise the point, indeed.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to Councillor Hutchinson.
Hi there. It was just on, following a bit on from that last question, also just looking at the
or so the table of carrot and sticks, basically, things we can do to encourage people onto public transport and things we can do to discourage people using their cars. I didn't notice, and it may have been I just didn't pick it up, the use of park and rides, where I understand if people live 5 miles from a bus stop, they need to get the car to get anywhere really. They can't rely on public transport. But when you get closer to the like the city, is it possible to try and get that people to take that intermediate step of stopping at the park and rides and then using the public transport where the networks are a bit more comprehensive, a bit more reliable? Could that be something we can maybe look at a little bit more?
Tim?
Yes, indeed, and it's potentially an option. I'm going to say though that the jury is out on park and rides. Their impacts on car kilometres are very locationally specific, by which I mean that they can have effects on reducing the number of car kilometres driven for that last bit into a large town or city centre, typically, but actually sometimes can result in more people driving a longer distance if people drive most of the way from home to the edge of the city and then only use public transport for the last bit. So park and rides can actually result in a net increase in car kilometres in some circumstances.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Davison.
Thanks very much, and it is kind of following on from what others have said, but I can't see how we can ever reduce car use in certainly in the northeast without a cost-effective and widespread alternative. And at the moment, it's cheaper and easier to go places in the car than it is any other mode of transport. You know, trains have gone from a lot of the parts of the northeast. There's no alternative. Buses are unreliable. They're getting fewer all the time, and they're incredibly expensive here. When you look at Edinburgh, you know, we're all very jealous of the good bus services and the cost in the central belt, and we understand that's because there's a lot more people. But you can't get people out of cars if you don't have a cost-effective alternative. And a lot of people do have to go to different centres to work. I guess it's a choice, but people do like to not to live on the doorstep of their jobs, and that's all cultural, I suppose. So it is about a massive cultural change here, and that's a long-term project for the cultural change in this area. And I guess home working has increased or decreased car use quite a bit. But then folk are probably using cars more in leisure time because they're not out and about so much during their working hours, so it swings and roundabouts. But we need, you know, a good network of alternative transport if this is ever going to succeed.
Okay, thank you. I have one question, which is quite worrying on your figure 2 charts, is obviously with mental health and everything, we're encouraging people to do more leisure. But looking at your chart, we're actually jumping in a car to do more leisure. So it's a spiral going up in that case, just something I've noted there.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate this may be beyond the scope of your research, but I'll ask the question anyway, just to see if you thought about it. Clearly, all your options there have focused very much on transport interventions, but I think you mentioned in your introductory spiel that transport policy is only one part of public policy. So, you know, have you thought about the things that we could be doing, particularly in terms of land use planning and 20-minute neighbourhoods, which I totally understand don't necessarily work in rural areas as well, but you know, is there more that we could be doing with other policy areas, particularly land use planning, that might help on this?
The answer to your question is yes, within the level of detail within this report. I think around both those issues, 20-minute neighbourhoods, which is partly a transport intervention, you know, because perhaps transport planners like me understand about how you could improve some of the urban realm and the active travel routes and those sorts of things, but it's the non-transport stuff as well, isn't it, about where services are located and the sorts of things that needs input from other sectors as well. But across planning issues more generally, yes, they have some opportunity to change behaviour. 20-minute neighbourhoods do to an extent, but they tend to influence the shortest journeys. So they might actually influence a fairly large proportion of journeys, but they tend to influence a small proportion of car kilometres. And I usually at this point state that the number of car kilometres travelled by residents of the Netherlands, who've done some brilliant stuff on active travel, public transport, 20-minute neighbourhoods planning and the like, is greater than it is in Scotland. And if you look at a lot of their interurban roads, they're very, very busy. And a lot of their suburban roads away from the town and city centres. So yes, I think also the thing to caution is this target is by 2030. So our opportunity to deliver massive change, a change at a 20 to 30% level within those elements by 2030, I'm not a planner, but I feel, and you might want to comment on it, but it is modest within that 6.5 years.
Yeah, I am a planner and I would agree with that.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks very much for this report. It's interesting and depressing at the same time, but it's realistic. I just wondered, and when you looked at your scenarios, whether you'd thought about, this might be slightly controversial, but removing the desire for people from the Shire to come into the city. So you talked about as much as you can. You talked about parking charges in the, within the local authorities' power, etc. You could actually put parking charges in place in the city, remove parking charges from the Shire, and encourage people to actually go to the town centres that we're trying to regenerate in the Shire. So it's slightly flipping it, but as as it says in the report, people from the Shire are actually, doing the most miles, coming into the city, etc., and exacerbating the mileage basically in the region. If there was more attractive options within the Shire, they wouldn't be making the drive from Peterhead into Aberdeen if we had regenerated the towns to the extent that we would actually like. So one is really to see whether that had been considered. And secondly, done very little research on this, just a quick bit on the internet kind of thing. But it seems to be the towns and cities that are most successful in actually driving down mileage, etc. The theme seems to be predominantly buses and bikes. Now, we've obviously got, we'll discuss Aberdeen Rapid Transport with it. It's coming, it's slowly coming. We might approve it, but that's on the horizon maybe. But bikes. Now, I came in here early today. I spent 2 hours in the city centre. I saw a plethora of e-bikes, static. I'm a big fan of e-bikes. I think they can be transformational. They can, they can get people that are maybe haven't been on a bike for a long time, whatever, getting going kind of thing and all that kind of stuff. I took a wee wander across a couple of the stands. There's no information. There's a QR code on a bike that says scan me to unlock me. Now, if you're 60, 65 and thinking you might want to go and cycle around about the city, straight away that's I would imagine, a no, I counted 19 people on bikes. That's how sad I am, just like going around counting them all kind of thing. One person was on one of those e-bikes. 5 were Deliveroo people. For a city this size, we are not bike friendly. I think we would probably, we aspire to being bike friendly. And there's lots of issues with it. And also, likewise, I saw one person coming in from the Shire going up the tyre bagger. There is hats off to the boy. He was struggling and all the cars were zooming past him. And there is planned infrastructure there, but I can't get a date out of anybody for the connection from Dice to Blackburn. We're doing since I came on here, I've only been Nestrans for a year. I've been banging on about the infrastructure and trying to get the dates, etc. I'm wondering whether under Get About and transformational change, etc., there's any possibility that we could actually apply for funding, get funding, or award funding from Nestrans for an app whereby people who are thinking about actually going on active travel could actually just go on straight away. Okay, how do I safely get from there to there. And we would actually have all the routes on there, the routes that are coming, so they can say, actually, you know what, I can't do it this year, but in 6 months' time, I'll actually be able to make that commute. And we actually link up all our infrastructure, and it'd be there, you know, a touch of a button kind of thing. Ah, that's possible. And it would actually be more encouraging, and people, because the perception in the city, I've spoken to quite a lot of people, oh, it's not safe. You've got buses going flying past you, you've got nutters and cars and all that kind of stuff. We're not bike friendly. We need to move. It won't solve everything, but it's part of the solution. And we seem to be doing very little towards it, although we talk about a lot. We've got lots of routes coming, etc., city and shire. But you know, they're coming so slowly, it's unreal. So anyway, I'll just leave that out there.
I'll pick up some of those points. I don't know. Nestrans office might want to pick up some of the others as well. But I think, you know, you'd ask, firstly, apologies for depressing you. It is indeed a challenging topic. You'd ask the question about our research on related to parking charges. There is general evidence that increasing parking charges will reduce car use and vice versa. The issues around the complexity of, well, if you were to make parking cheaper or easier in the shire towns, would then fewer people come into the city, and what would the net impact would be? I wish I could forecast the number of that sort of implication. I just don't think there's the evidence within our sector, unfortunately, for us to understand that thing. So we have not done that, nor looked specifically at the impact of sort of regeneration issues about what that would take. There is potentially something in that. I'll let others, if they wish, comment about promoting active travel and that sort of thing. But I will emphasise that whilst, and I'm a huge proponent of active travelling, which is a large proportion of the work that I do, largely do it for health benefits and social inclusion benefits, it will not, I'm afraid, have a massive difference on the number of car kilometres driven in the region, because it's such a small proportion overall. E-bikes help because people make longer journeys on e-bikes. There's good evidence around that, but there still tend to be the shorter journeys overall. It does little towards those long car journeys that are so lots to unpick in there. But so it makes a contribution, but at that 20 to 30% level, it's not going to get us a long way down that just in its own right, but lots of other benefits out of active travel as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Yule.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Reid raised a number of interesting points. I have to say, first of all, I take my hat off to anyone who tries to cycle up the tire bagger and the dual carriageway. That is, they're braver than I am. You also mentioned Aberdeen being cycle unfriendly, and I would absolutely agree with him. I used to cycle in Aberdeen city centre. I wouldn't now, and haven't for a good few years. But we are committed to changing that, and we will do so. So watch this space. Maybe even watch this forthcoming cycle lane, or segregated cycle lane, I should say. In relation to the big issue e-bikes, somebody may have more up-to-date information than I have, but the last update I got was that big issue e-bikes were very happy with the level of usage they were achieving in their first few months. And you certainly do see them zipping about the city.
Yes, I can imagine on the e-bikes as well. It depends on what time of the day as well, when you might see them. Okay, I see no other questions, so I'd thank Tim and Paul for that report. Move to the recommendations on page 120, 6 point. Oh, sorry, Councillor Reid.
Apologies, I did actually mention about the an app. I think it would make it much easier for people. I don't know if it's a possibility. If it's not a possibility, fine. But just trying to think outside the box, I think it would actually really help people if they could actually just like find safe routes, etc., and get around the city. And Shire.
Come in there. Thank you, Chair. Just to let you know, on the Get About website at the moment, we do have a Get About by foot, Get About by bike sort of pages on it, and it does have all the existing walking and cycling trails. It's not necessarily an app at the moment, but the City Council also have their Go Apps app, which does have options for walking and cycling as well, and also has their walking trails on it as well. So the beginnings of that is already existing and is available, and we just need to direct people to either the Go Apps app or the Get About website, because the existing stuff is all up there. If anybody wants to have a look at it, it might just not be in the most user-friendly way at the moment, but the information is out there.
Okay, I see no other questions. So we go to recommendations on page 120, 6.1 A to E, if we all agree. Thank you. We now move on to item 5.2, the A90-A952 Transport Corridor Evidence Review, and that will be, sorry, Councillor Gill.
Sorry, the recommendations on page 120, I have a feeling that the first word of recommendation B should be agree rather than recommend. But I'm maybe just being pedantic.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Okay, with that change, we move on to 5.2 as said, and that will be Paul Finch.
Thank you very much, Chair. The purpose of the report is to present outcomes of an evidence review focused on the transport corridor linking Ellen, Peterhead and Fraserburgh along the A90 and A952 roads. It obviously bifurcates at Toll of Burness. The work's been commissioned by Nestrans and funded through the Strategic Transport Appraisal element of the Aberdeen City Region Deal, and the key findings were presented to the Aberdeen City Region Deal Joint Board on the 2nd of June 2023. In terms of the background, this has been a long-standing corridor of interest to Nestrans and local authorities. It continues to be a particular focus of interest across all modes. The A90 north of Ellen, Peterhead and Fraserburgh is the trunk road, with the Transport Scotland acting as a road authority. The A952 linking Toll of Burness to Cortes Junction is a local authority road. The overall corridor links some of Aberdeenshire's largest towns to Aberdeen City. It's a strategic growth corridor in terms of land use planning, links together the region's key ports, considered a vital element of infrastructure for the seafood industry, oil and gas sector, offshore renewables industry, and future carbon capture proposals. Despite the wealth of previous work undertaken and the presentation of this evidence to the Strategic Transport Projects Review process, no outcomes specifically on this corridor were taken forward into that particular programme, although Transport Scotland have subsequently confirmed that doesn't necessarily mean that they would not be receptive to further business case development in this area, provided it was compliant to the current guidance and policy direction. In November 22, consultant Stantec were asked to review the previous option appraisal work, highlighting material changes and then consequential impacts for the case for change on the option development work. We were seeking to gain intelligence in terms to inform our future approach in terms of that business case development and the arguments we wish to be putting forward to Transport Scotland. Appendix A contains an executive summary of the findings. Key findings are that reviews found the problems, opportunities, constraints previously identified continue to be broadly valid, including north of Ellen, unreliable, unpredictable journey times, road safety concerns, lack of diversionary routes, and limited public transport options, particularly off with the main corridor. The impacts of these problems have impacts on existing industries and businesses, including fishing and energy industries. Often, many of these industries are dependent on just-in-time deliveries. More of a challenge or difficult is attracting inward investment. Constraints on land use development in this area as well, in terms of requirements to balance the needs of houses with safe junction accesses, etc. And elements of social and economic exclusion due to poor transport connectivity, associated impacts on the regeneration priorities of this area as well. And definitely within Aberdeenshire, that northern coast remains a key regeneration priority in terms of the local community plan. Given the progression of policy and appraisal guidance, the consultants recommend that the previously established transport plan objectives were refined alongside an update of options in their assessments. So if board members are content, we would wish to publish the full technical report on the Nestrans Board, Nestrans website following the meeting. Board members have previously been given access to the report. In line with the revised appraisal guidance, we'd like to now proceed to produce an updated case for change document and move to preliminary options and detailed options appraisal. We would use those as vehicles for wider and more in-depth engagement with the stakeholders and public. This would also require engagement with Transport Scotland, tying into parallel processes that they're involved with at the moment in terms of land use planning, community planning and economic development. Subject to approvals, we'll be seeking to kick this work off shortly, towards the end of July, and aiming for the first stage to be complete by March 2024, the work continuing to 24-25. Following consideration of the board, it also remains the intention to present the work via Aberdeenshire Council committees and member briefings. Specific outcomes from this process can then be fed into the ongoing update of the appraisal process, which I've highlighted. We'd also highlight that the campaign for North East Rail have received Just Transition funding to look at a stag-based multimodal corridor appraisal on this area as well, although very much looking more at the longer term options, whereas the work that we're trying to do is trying to look at that short to medium term options as well. There are a number of financial and risk implications to be aware of as well. We're seeking to manage these in terms of how we're managing the work in terms of the wider group of steering officers from Aberdeenshire Council and Aberdeen City through the Aberdeen City Deal Transport Working Group. Funding allocations are available for the next stage of funding across the next 2 years. We are aware that work on the corridor continues to attract a high level of wider political stakeholder and media interest at this time, and we're obviously accordingly mindful of the need to proceed in an objective, evidence-based and transparent manner. But we'd also need to ensure that due to the majority of the corridor corresponding with the trunk road, the work will need to take account of their guidance and input, and in particular their guidance around sustainable transport hierarchy, sustainable investment hierarchy, and the challenges that we've just talked about in the previous report around the overall goal of carbon reduction. We are aware that resourcing constraints within Transport Scotland are impacting on the timely receipt of some of this advice, although recent correspondence has confirmed their willingness to positively engage with the work. The recommendations are that the board note the findings of the evidence review, approve the publication of the full technical report on the Nestrans website, approve progression of the work by means of updated case for change, updated preliminary options appraisal and detailed appraisal, and confirm delegated authority to the partnership director to award the contract following the execution of the execution of the above work following a competitive and compliant tendering process. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Paul. Move on to questions from Councillor Mayor.
Thank you. I'd just like to say that it's hugely disappointing that the Scottish Government chose to not include these routes into the STPR2, considering the huge importance these areas will have in delivering a more sustainable and safe energy supply for our country. The North East of Scotland is going to be one of the main delivery points for renewable energy in the future. On that topic, the overall strategic growth corridor actually only goes to Peterhead. It doesn't include the A952 from the Tulliburness to Fraserburgh, but I think that should be reviewed because Fraserburgh is going to be equally as vital, considering the Fraserburgh master plan for the harbour there. And I would ask that that be reconsidered going forward. I think that's about my say. I could say more, but I'm not sure. I was brought into this at the last minute because someone had to go, but I haven't seen anywhere the use of the development of crawler lanes, which might ease the congestion and the road safety issues. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mayor, and we certainly agree with your comment around the importance of the route in terms of the national economy and the STPR2. Regarding the strategic growth corridor, I think that's the current regional spatial strategy is being carried over from the previous strategic development plan. Although I do understand that in time that will be reviewed in terms of a replacement or a non-statutory replacement to that. So that might be something that could be considered in the mix of the land use and the economic development outcomes. It's not necessarily directly in the control of Nestrans. The suggestion of crawler lanes or overtaking lanes certainly could well be considered within that long list of options. Certainly, it's not all about increasing capacity. It's about making sure that there is safety and resilience on the route. And that very much ties in with the Transport Scotland's objectives at the moment. So thank you very much for those comments, and we'll take those on board.
Okay, I see no other hands. So we'll go to the recommendations on page 137. Note the findings of the evidence review. Approve the publication of the full technical report on the Nestrans website. Approve progression of the work by means of updated case for change. Confirm delegated authority to the partnership director to award the contracts for the execution of the above work following the completion and compliant tendering process. If you all agree, thank you. I'll thank Paul for that paper there. And we'll now move on to, there is nothing under item 6, and we move on to item 7, progress report, and that's by Rab.
Thanks, Chair. Primarily to say that the progress report is still in the previous form. We have, however, managed to have conversations with Colin Allenach, who had raised questions at a previous board about the information that was contained therein. We have, for this version, added a RAG, red, amber, green, which has given us an opportunity to focus a little bit more on the previous arrow system that we'd used to date. We will be able to make changes for future reports. We just weren't able to do it in time for today's board. So this one is still in the former form, but we are intending, having had conversations with Colin, to change that format going forward. Thanks.
Okay, I see no questions there. Oh, sorry, Councillor Blake.
Thank you. Can I just ask one question? I noted obviously the cycle rack installation that's obviously at the, mentioned to do with parks. But I was at the Aberdeen Highland Games on Sunday, and it was really noticeable that obviously it was a nice day, so a lot of people cycled there, and I came by bike, as did with my kids, and we were there early, so we parked our bikes up at the cafe. But there was no temporary. There was plenty temporary parking for cars. There was no temporary bike racks. So people, you could see all along the fence, people had tried to put their bike onto the fence. All the park benches in the park had bikes, multiple bikes attached onto them. And I was wondering, when we're looking at events that we want to bring people into the city, is there any consideration given to how we offer temporary cycle rack installation at these events? I'm thinking that on the weekend we're going to have the Highland Games down at Duthie Park. You know, what provision do we have for things like that?
Thanks for that. It's certainly something we can have a look at and maybe pass on. We do meet with the events team on a regular basis, and we could maybe pick up with them the opportunity for doing a little bit more on the travel planning side of things. But we're not directly involved in these major events, but if we can influence and advise the people that are, then we'll certainly try and pick that up. Perhaps David would add to that.
Please, David.
Thanks, Chair. With the assistance of yourselves, I think we can influence. So I'm happy to take that up with transport colleagues, and I'm going to say, as part of Offshore Europe, for example, we have worked with the organisers to ensure that there will be the electric bikes and so forth. So I think yes, absolutely. I'm happy to take that up.
Okay. Sorry, Colin.
Hi, thanks. I'd just like to say one of the progress things. I'd just like to say thanks very much to Aberdeenshire Council for completing that section between Balmedy and Black Dog of the cycle path. It's already made quite a difference, and I look forward to the Merker to Black Dog section being completed by the City Council in the near future as well. Thank you.
Okay, that's that. I'll now move on to item 8, publications and consultations, and that's Adam Kench.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to take the board through the publications and consultations. We've got 5 publications and consultations to talk you through. So firstly is the Cycle Framework for Active Travel, a plan for everyday cycling, which was released by Transport Scotland on the 26th of April. And within the plan sets out 6 themes, which partners should look at, which is safe cycling infrastructure, effective resourcing, fair access, training and education, network planning and monitoring. There's linked to the document within the report if you would like to look in your own time. The next report is about the Hightrans Case for Change consultation. Hightrans have started the process of creating an updated regional transport strategy, and the response to this from officers is seen in Appendix 1. The Case for Change is well aligned with the national policy documents and links well with our own RTS too. So then there's 2 paragraphs about which are worth highlighting. So within the report, it talks a lot about the Orkney to Aberdeen route and the ferry and air routes. Hightrans noted in the Case for Change that these modes are not included in the sustainable travel hierarchy, and Hightrans commit to keeping these at the centre of their updated regional transport strategy, and Nestrans supports them in this, given they are a key lifeline for island communities. Furthermore, as we've talked about already today, the reducing car kilometres is a big issue. It's a Scottish Government policy, and there is a bit of conflict between that and encouraging tourism, because obviously you need people coming to your area to spend their money and stay with you. And if there's not public transport available, then that obviously makes things incredibly difficult. And also, as also mentioned, electric and hydrogen vehicles aren't part of the reduction target. So alternative fuels could actually see a rise in the amount of kilometres instead of a reduction. Next, we have the Murray Regional Spatial Strategy and Local Development Plan Call for Ideas, which was brought to the attention of the board at the last meeting. There was a report they were requesting call for ideas about a regional spatial strategy and the new local development plan, which will be coming into force in 2027. Since the last board meeting, officers have been working on a submission, and this can be seen in Appendix 1, as it was attached to the Hightrans Case for Change, given that Murray falls within the Hightrans area. Next, moving on, is the Aberdeenshire Council Local Transport Strategy, which is currently out for consultation. They're in the creation of starting a new local transport strategy, and for this they created 9 thematic papers, which Nestrans officers have reviewed. Appendix 2 presents the outcome of this review with a summary of each paper, a summary of what is said in the RTS, and a Nestrans recommendation based on the regional transport strategy and the overall regional perspective. Nestrans offers continued working with Aberdeenshire Council as the updated LTS is developed, and Nestrans officers are represented on the member officer working group established by Aberdeenshire Council, and we continue to work on this group. And with the outcomes of today's board paper, we will work towards submitting the official survey document to Aberdeenshire Council. Finally, there's the Scottish Government Local Living and 20-minute neighbourhoods consultation, which we've sort of touched on already today as well. They are expecting a response on the 20th of July, and transport is a prominent feature of the guidance, given, as we talked about, the way we access our services impacts much of our lives. Within that, there's the Place Standard tool, which has 5 overarching categories, which are movement, space, resource, civic, and stewardship. And then within that, there's then moving around, public transport and traffic and parking. So all three of these elements think about the big scale of how we travel and the small scale. And all of these play into a part of how the national government would follow the sustainable travel hierarchy and policy aims such as the reduction target. The guidance is useful in discussing the need to understand the context of our places, and it brings in this idea of existence versus experience. It's important how people experience their access to shops, transport and other amenities, not just that they exist. In relation to the role of context, it's important to understand that 20-minute neighbourhoods may not be achievable in our rural communities, and it's about working with our rural communities to make sure that local living principles can be adopted to the most effective manner. Officers are currently preparing a response to this consultation, and the points raised in this summary will be discussed further in this, in doing so highlighting the problems and opportunities that we face in the northeast of Scotland, and the response will be informed by input from land use planning colleagues and both partner local authorities. Moving finally to the recommendations, the board is recommended to note the publication of the documents outlined in this report, approve the submission of Appendix 2 to Aberdeenshire Council to support the development of their local transport strategy, and use this to inform responses to the associated questionnaire consultation, support the development and submission of consultation response to the local living and 20-minute neighbourhood consultation prior to the 20th of July with approval from chairs and vice chairs, and authorise officers to continue to engage with partners organisations as these policy documents develop. I'm happy to take any questions if I can, or one of the other Nestrans officers will help me to do so. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Chair. Less of a question than a comment. I'd be quite interested to see Nestrans' response to the 20-minute neighbourhood once it's been worked up. So if that could be issued to board members, that would be really appreciated.
Rob.
Chair, I'm happy to take that on board, and I guess the approval process will be chair and vice chairs rather than the complexity, but I'm quite happy to share a draft with all members and get input as appropriate, if that would suffice.
That would be perfect. Even if it needs to move faster than that, even just seeing what has been input would be really, really helpful as well. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other questions. So we go to recommendation to approve on page 194, 1 to 4. Approved. Thank you. We'll now move on to item 7, information bulletin, and that is Kelly Wiltshire.
Thank you, Chair. This information bulletin is just to provide information and updates to the board on matters that don't require decisions. So the first one here is an update on a community planning project that Nestrans have been involved in regard to trying to encourage more people to walk. Now, the work that we do with community planning is not to try and implement big segregated cyclepaths or anything. It's very much around implementing small tests of change, ideas that have come up from the community, see if we can implement them as a project, and if they work, to see whether it's worthwhile rolling out across the city or across the area. So one of the ideas that we were given from a member of the local community was to install park benches from the city centre, so around the Mount Hooley roundabout, up to the Forster Hill campus where the hospital is, and GP surgeries and obviously various other things on that campus for both people who work there, but also people going there for appointments. So working closely with our colleagues in Aberdeen City Council, we managed to get some funding through Cycle Walking Safer Routes funding to purchase and install 9 park benches along that stretch of road, which is Hutchinson Street and Westburn Road. And Nestrans has helped fund before and after surveys for pedestrian movement. So seeing how many people walked along that route before we installed the benches and how many are using it after. So we know how many people were walking before. The 9 park benches have now been installed. There's a little photograph of one there next to some of the big issue e-bikes. And just last week, we got a pedestrian survey done, which I'm still awaiting the results from, to see whether it has resulted in an increase of walking. So that's one of the projects that we have been involved in. We also just wanted to inform board that the reported road casualties for 2022 is now being published, and I've listed what the key findings for the report is there and a link to it if you're interested. There is also a link available for Police Force Division and local authority areas as well. Scottish Transport Statistics 2022 has also been published recently, and again I've put a link into the report there that you can go and have a look at. We get a lot of our monitoring information from the Scottish Transport Statistics, so it certainly is a very important document for Nestrans and how we monitor our projects. I also wanted to raise awareness with members about the Active Travel Transformation Fund that Transport Scotland has had. Nestrans did put in an application for this for around £500,000 for our Active Travel Action Plan to give cycle space signage and for some core path work. Unfortunately, we have not been successful in that bid for funding, and neither Aberdeen City or Aberdeenshire Council bids were supported by Transport Scotland. We, along with our council officer colleagues, have been offered a debrief session, which we will be taking up with them. And I've put in a link there for projects that have been awarded funding, but unfortunately none of them were in the North East. For railway stations, we were given some information from ScotRail recently just on the numbers of people that have been using the railway since the pandemic. So you can see for 2020, 2021, obviously the figures were very low, bearing in mind that that was affected not only by the pandemic, but also the Carmont derailment and the line being closed for several months. So the numbers clearly were very low in 2021, but you can see that there has been a steady increase in the amount of people using our railway stations over the last couple of years. And we've also got a bit of an update here around Getabout. It was just to let members know, if you weren't already aware, that the Getabout Aberdeen Cycling Festival, which was held on Saturday the 3rd of September last year, won a Sporting Event of the Year award at the E-Awards earlier this year, which is excellent. We've also aware of the Centre for Doctoral Training and Artificial Intelligence for Sustainable Transport, and Nestrans are proposing to provide in-kind support for this proposal around creating this Centre for Doctoral Training, which should really be interesting, and see whether it helps address our rural transport issues and so on, and how AI can potentially help us optimise transport options and service provision in the future. So we're looking forward to seeing how that proposal develops. Also, just to let you know that the Aberdeen and Grampian Chamber of Commerce 2023 Investment Tracker has been published, and again, we have put in a link there. It highlights the importance of transport movements and alongside some of the large transport projects, and also includes our proposal around Aberdeen Rapid Transit. I'm happy to take questions, but as I say, it is just for information what we've been providing there, and I know there's a lot of information and links and so on.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. One question is Colin Allen.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks very much. Just a quickie. I know we've got a debrief session with about the £500,000 we didn't get. Did we get any feedback at all about why we were unsuccessful with those bids? I mean, I remember before a previous meeting we came out with really low levels of funding from central government for Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. Was there anything again? Why are we getting these low levels of funding?
I get the impression it is due to the want shovel-ready projects, so projects that literally could start tomorrow to be implemented. And that's where the money's gone to. So projects that have already been approved and, you know, have gone through all of the processes, the stag processes and so on that need to be done, and are ready literally just to dig up the road, so to speak, to implement.
Right, so we don't have any in that state. I mean, it's just going back over the years about the number of consultations and everything we go through, but we still don't have any that are just about ready to go. I mean, again, going back over things have been talked about that. Possibly my bugbear, but the Mercar to Black Dog one, for instance, we've been talking about that for absolute years. We must be just about shovel ready for that, I would have thought.
Yeah, I don't have all the detail, unfortunately, but that's certainly the impression I've been getting. I'm not sure if John or David or anybody else has any further information they can give on that.
I think the answers have already been given in the room earlier today by some of what some of the board members have said. We're not ready. We don't meet the standard. Our bids didn't meet the standard of those from elsewhere. We need to be. We need to catch up.
Okay, Councillor Reid.
Yeah, just briefly, once you get the debrief, can you share it with members?
Yes, absolutely.
Councillor Yule.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say it's great to see the usage figures of both Kintour and Lawrencekirk stations being so healthy. That does demonstrate the demand is out there for additional stops on the line. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I see no other questions. So the recommendation is to recommend that the board note the contents of this report, and I thank Kelly for that. And we move now on to item 10, conferences and presentation. That's Rab.
Thanks, Chair. Just a short report for noting, informing members of conferences and presentations that have taken place since the last meeting of the board. You can see a real focus on sustainability, just transition and zero carbon. I think that's the way that the agenda seems to be moving, and we are trying to keep abreast of developments in that area in particular. Staff have been going to conferences as appropriate. I think all of them have involved no cost though, and some have been online. So there has been a change from when conferences used to cost £200 or £300. It was a day trip away on the train. Quite often now it's a much more efficient and effective way of staff time. John also underwent the cycle training course through Cycling Scotland and is now able, I think, to train other potential cyclists. So in line with the presentation that we had today, you'll be now within Nestrans got someone who is able to train trainers and then get more and more people through a cascade of information able to safely cycle within the region.
Okay, I see no questions. So we go to the recommendation is note the contents of Appendix 1. We now move on to item 11 by Rab, and that's pending business and reports for future meetings.
Thanks, Chair. Again, fairly short report for information on items that have been brought forward, which were previously on the pending list, and a number that we hope to come to you in the near future, September or potentially November board meetings. So quite happy to add things. I think there's been some discussion today about potential reports coming forward, and we can have a look through the notes of today's meeting and see what items we can bring forward to future meetings as well.
Okay, thank you, Rab. We've got Councillor Reid.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, but on the Nestrans active travel plan, I did mention this before, but when it does come to us, is there a possibility of getting a map of all the current routes, all the ones that are being planned, target dates for them? We need this kind of information so we, we can explain to constituents what we're doing, what we're aiming for. And even, if we miss the target date, fair enough, but at least we'll have an idea of what we're doing. And then it's something that we can actually aim for.
Yep, can certainly have a look at that and try and bring that back as as informative as we can get it. Yeah.
Okay, I see no other questions, so we go to the recommendation, and is to recommend that the board note the report on pending business. So we will now, we're going into exempt items now. So can I ask any guests to leave the chamber?
I'm not sure if there's any press in the press gallery. If you can